Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Today we're
Really fascinating topic today.
yeah, we're going way back in time to ancient Mesopotamia to take a closer look at God's covenant with Abram in Genesis 15.
Right, Genesis 15.
Now, our source material today is a sermon that dives into faith, God's faithfulness, and the responsibility of, I guess you could say, fatherhood or anyone in a position of kind of spiritual leadership.
Yeah, and I think what's so incredible about this story is how it still speaks to us, thousands of years later.
Right.
This idea of God promising Abram, who is childless at this point, descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. It's really mind-boggling.
It's pretty incredible. I mean, talk about setting a high bar, right? Like if I were in Abram's shoes, would I have that same unwavering faith, especially after years of waiting? It makes you wonder.
Yeah, it really is a test of patience and trust. I mean, years go by and still no children, and so Abram starts to doubt, which is understandable, totally human, right?
Sure.
So he goes to God and he's like, look, I'm doing my part, but where are all these descendants you promised?
Okay, so instead of, getting annoyed or dismissing Abram's concerns, which are totally valid, what does God do? He takes Abram outside for a little stargazing.
Right. What a powerful visual.
Yeah.
It's like God is saying, Abram, just look up. Can you even imagine trying to count all those stars? That's how many descendants you're going to have.
Wow.
Just the vastness of the night sky, as a reflection of God's promise. It must have been an incredible moment for Abram.
And the really amazing part is that Abram believes him.
Yeah.
And the sermon highlights this. It says, Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. But what does that actually mean for us, living today? How do we cultivate that same kind of trust, that radical faith, when we're facing these situations that feel impossible?
I think that's where we have to understand faith as this deep, unwavering trust. It's not just about believing in God, it's about trusting in God's plan for your life, even when things don't make sense in the moment, or we can't see what the outcome is going to be.
So it's really about trusting the process.
Trusting the process.
Which can be hard.
Absolutely, especially when, life throws you a curveball.
Yeah, it really does make you think how often we let doubt creep in. How often do we let fear kind of take over instead of holding on to that faith that Abram had?
Right. Well, and Abram's story is a good reminder for us that God doesn't always operate on our timeline. Sometimes that waiting, that's part of the process, and it refines our faith and prepares us for the blessing that's coming.
So it's not just like downtime. It's an important part of the journey.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That's an important point.
And to really kind of solidify the promise, God establishes this formal covenant with Abram.
Okay.
And it's not just a casual, hey, let's shake on it.
Right.
It's a big deal, a very serious ritualistic ceremony.
There's the animal sacrifice, the smoking fire pot, a torch passing between these divided pieces. It's pretty intense.
Wait.
Why go through all of that?
Well, it shows how serious it is, how binding this commitment from God is. I mean, in ancient cultures, covenants were the most sacred agreements you could make. They weren't something you just broke easily.
Oh, wow.
So by going through this whole elaborate ritual, it's like God saying, Abram, I'm all in. This is unbreakable. I am committed to you and your descendants.
So God's putting his signature on the contract, so to speak.
Exactly. No fine print.
No loopholes.
No loopholes. And that really leads us to this theme of God's faithfulness, which the sermon talks about.
Okay.
Because, Abram had to wait decades for this promise to be fulfilled.
Right.
But throughout all of that, his faith never wavered.
What an incredible testament to his faith.
Absolutely. I mean, especially in a world where we're used to instant gratification.
Right. We want everything right now.
Exactly. And I think that's the question we all have to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
What can we learn from Abram's story, and how can we apply those lessons to our own lives?
I think that's a really important question.
Think about it. How many times do we give up on things because we don't see results right away?
Too many, probably.
Probably, but Abram's story encourages us to trust God's timing even when it's not our timing, even when it doesn't fit our plan or expectations.
It's hard to do, but it's powerful.
Right, and it really reminds us that God's faithfulness isn't limited by our human perception of time. His promises are eternal.
That's beautiful. I love that. And it also makes me think about this other theme the sermon digs into, a father's responsibility, or really the responsibility that comes with being a spiritual leader.
Yeah, that's crucial because God wasn't just calling Abram to be a father to his biological children. He was preparing him to be the father of a nation, a people who would carry God's blessing to the rest of the world.
That's a huge responsibility.
It's massive.
It goes way beyond providing food and shelter.
Absolutely. It was about creating a legacy of faith, making sure that future generations would come to know and trust God, just like Abram did.
It's about passing on something much bigger than yourself.
It really is. And that's where I think the sermon really connects with us today, because whether we're parents, mentors, teachers, whoever, if we're in a position where we're leading others spiritually, We're called to do more than just tell people about God.
You have to live it too, right?
Yeah, you got to show them what faith in action looks
Like
like.
by example. Be the
Exactly.
change you want to see in the world.
Right.
It's like we're passing on the torch, like that fire pot in the covenant ceremony.
Yeah.
But how do we make sure that that torch keeps burning brightly for generations to come? How do we equip those that are coming after us to really receive and carry on God's promises?
Those are great questions, and I think that's something we're going to dive into deeper in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so stay tuned, everybody, because we're going to unpack that and more.
Def
We'll be right back after a short break. So we were talking about the responsibility of passing on the faith, right, to the next generation. And I gotta say, it's kind of a daunting task.
It really is. I mean, where do we even begin?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that faith isn't something you just inherit automatically. It's something that has to be cultivated.
Okay.
It's more like a seed. It needs the right environment to grow. It needs to be nurtured and watered.
So it's less about preaching and more about creating that space where faith can flourish.
Yeah, exactly. It's about modeling that life, a life grounded in faith, and not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. You know what I mean?
Right, actions speak louder than words, so it's about showing them what it looks like.
And it's also about being transparent with our own struggles,
Yeah.
being open about our doubts, because that makes us relatable.
Yeah, that makes it real.
Yeah, it shows them, hey, it's okay to question things.
You don't have to have it all figured out.
Right, it's a journey.
Yeah,
It's not like you reach this point and then you've got it all down, you're done,
Right.
So that authenticity is important.
authenticity being real, I love that because it makes it more relatable, right?
Right, you can't expect people to just blindly accept faith.
Yeah.
They need to see it lived out genuinely and authentically.
Yeah, it has to be real.
It has to be real.
Yeah. It's about letting them see how faith is part of your life,
Yeah.
how it influences the decisions you make, how it shapes your perspective, and how it gives you hope, even when things are tough.
Yeah, that's a good point. It reminds me of that quote.
Which one?
Preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words.
Oh, yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, so it's more about living a life that reflects what you believe so that people are just naturally drawn to that, like moths to a flame.
It's like you're emanating that light.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
And that brings us back to Abram's story, because God wasn't just getting him ready to be a father to his own kids, but also to an entire nation,
Right.
to a people who would carry God's blessings out into the world.
It's a whole legacy.
That's a legacy.
Yeah, it goes way beyond just genes.
Yeah, it's about spiritual inheritance, passing on that faith to last through generations.
So that's a challenge for all of us, whether we're parents or mentors or really anyone who has some kind of influence in other people's lives.
Right.
We have this opportunity to really shape the future, spiritually speaking.
Yeah, I think so. And the question is, what does that look like practically?
Yeah, how do you actually do that?
How do we prepare the next generation to receive and carry those promises from God?
Well, one thing I think you can do is just create those opportunities, those spaces to talk about faith,
Good point.
not about forcing your beliefs on someone, but inviting them into the conversation so they can ask questions.
Yeah, and, express their doubts if they have them, because we all do.
Absolutely.
And,
yes.
just explore their own journey wherever they're at.
Kind of like that night when God took Abram out to look at the stars, right?
Yeah,
It sparked something in him. It made him think about possibilities, just that sense of wonder.
it made him curious.
Right, yeah.
And it's not just about talking, it's also about serving together.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Demonstrating that compassion in action, showing young people how their faith can make a difference in the world.
Yeah, put that faith into practice.
Put it into
Do
practice.
something.
Yeah, and let's not forget about the power of telling stories.
That's a good one.
Abram's story, even though it's thousands of years old, it still speaks to us today. It reminds us that God's promises are timeless.
They are.
And his faithfulness endures, from generation to generation.
Yeah, and so I think by sharing those stories of faith, of perseverance, it's like igniting that spark in people's hearts, giving them something tangible to hold on to.
Yeah, and giving them examples of what it looks like to really trust in God, to walk by faith, even when the path ahead is a little blurry.
It's like we're all part of this bigger story, this tapestry of faith, connecting those threads from the past to the present and creating something that's going to continue on into the future.
Yeah, it's a beautiful image.
It is.
And it all comes down to that willingness to believe, to trust in something bigger than ourselves.
That's where it starts, that leap of faith.
That radical trust, just like Abram looking up at those stars and choosing to believe God's promise, even though it seemed impossible.
So that's the challenge for us, right?
Yeah.
To look beyond what we can see and embrace the infinite possibilities of faith.
Yeah, I love that.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we have two big takeaways from the sermon.
Okay,
First, trust God's timing, even if it feels like things are moving really slow.
good one.
And second, We have a responsibility as spiritual guides to cultivate and pass on that legacy of faith, not just information, but a real passion for God.
Right, a desire to know him and to make him known.
Yeah, and I think that takes us back to that image of the stars, the same stars that Abram saw all those years ago,
Yeah, it's amazing.
a timeless reminder of God's promises.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if we all looked at the night sky with that perspective, not just as stars, but as a symbol of God's love, his faithfulness, and those promises that unite us across generations?
It's powerful stuff.
It really is. So as we head into the last part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to leave you with this question. What will you do to make sure those stars continue to inspire and guide the generations that come after us? How will you play your part in weaving that tapestry of faith, making sure that torch of belief keeps burning?
It really is amazing to think about, those stars that Abram looked up at all those years ago,
Yeah,
those same stars are still there.
still there.
It blows my mind.
I know, it's like this connection
Yeah, it's like this tangible connection to the past.
across time.
Yeah, across millennia, a reminder that God's promises are timeless.
It really is. No matter what happens in the world, those stars remain constant.
They do.
Just like God, just like his faithfulness. And that's what I love about this story.
Me too.
It speaks to this deep longing we all have,
Right.
for connection, for purpose, for something bigger than ourselves.
It's like we're all searching for meaning.
Yeah, we all want to know why we're here.
And I think that's what this story gives us, the sense that we're all part of something much bigger.
Right, it's this grand narrative, this ongoing story of faith that started way back with Abram.
And it's still going.
And it's still going, and we all have a role to play in it.
I like that. That's good. We're all part of the story.
We are. It's like we're all threads in this massive tapestry.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, and the choices that we make, how we live our lives, they all contribute to the overall picture.
It makes you think,
It does.
about the kind of legacy we're leaving behind.
Yeah, not just about money or what we accomplish in this world, but the spiritual impact, the seeds of faith that we're planting.
And it's not always the big things either.
No, not at all.
Sometimes it's the smallest gestures, the little acts of
A
kindness.
kind word.
Yeah, or just sharing your own story. Those things can make a bigger impact than we realize.
Definitely.
Abram dared to believe the impossible.
He did.
And look what happened.
Yeah, and we're still talking about him thousands of years later.
Right, we're all benefiting from his faith.
Imagine what we could accomplish if we had that same boldness.
That same audacity.
That same audacity to step out in faith, even when we don't know what's going to happen.
It all comes down to trust, doesn't it?
It does.
Trusting in God's promises like Abram did.
Yeah, and making that choice every day.
To walk by faith,
Yeah,
not by what we see,
and to trust that God is working things out even when we don't understand it.
even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive on Genesis 15,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with this. How are you going to apply the lessons we talked about today to your own life?
That's a good one. And how are you going to nurture those seeds of faith in the people around you?
And when you look up in those stars tonight,
Yeah.
let them remind you that God is with you.
He is always with us, guiding our steps, leading us into a future filled with amazing possibilities.
That's a beautiful thought.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.